Hey,
Hey, how's it going?
pretty good, pretty good.
Same. I'm gonna see if Zoom will survive me disconnecting VPN, so I might disconnect. We'll see.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if the bars, because it went red. I don't know if that was you or me.
It did not.
Yep, did not survive.
Should we get started?
Let's do it.
Joe's early. I still have like 3 more minutes to be late.
I can leave if you want me to. And then
Just come back in 3 minutes.
Don't forget to sign in. Looks like the only thing we have on the agenda right now is the rewrite volume mount thing. I assume you put that on there, Javier?
I did. And I know that Ben isn't here, but I'm wondering if it's still worth having a discussion around it to at least solidify some of my thoughts.
I think so. I mean, we can always go back to Ben with a conclusion to kind of the discussion, right?
Yep. Cool. Do you want me to get started on that?
Yeah, let's do it. Unless you think you want Steven here for the second half, since he said he'd be here at 1:30.
No, again, because I haven't really like concretely said like this is the real thing I'm proposing. I'd like to just maybe have a conversation.
Cool. Take it away.
All right. Share my screen. So after reviewing it yesterday, I kind of see where a lot of the other conversations were coming from, and I made a reply in the issue about some of the things that I was essentially gathering from the conversations. And as I did that, right, I kind of like stepped back and I just wanted to make sure that we were trying to solve the right thing, whereas it seems like there were a lot of conversations that were looking at other benefits to the proposed solution, where in my mind, the proposed solution was, anti-spec, and it was just like, hey, go crazy, do whatever you want. And then we're like, oh yeah, and it'll help us, solve these other problems too, right? But then it'll also have, some repercussions that we talked about, specifically the Linux issues with permissions. So after kind of looking at all that, I wanted to like clarify the motivation for this, at least from my perspective and what I've seen people request, is they want something that just works, right? And if we tell them like, hey, this will work for you, but it's really like an Swiss Army knife, and you just need to figure out exactly how to get your stuff in there to make it work, right? Like configure it properly, specific per builder or per build pack, then it seems a little bit awkward and weird to use, right? So with that in mind, like I put all my feedback on here, right? Like what my understanding was, what I was thinking about, very specific things like UX, limitations, and the motivations. And overall, I started working on something which is very like limited, right? It's focused in that primary motivation of, hey, I just want this when I run it the second time around to have that persisted information of the stuff that it downloaded for another image, if that makes sense. And one of the things that we talked about and was mentioned is that the home directory is already a writable directory. And so it's part of the spec to essentially already have that. And I think I talked to Emily a little bit about it, right, to see if there was, anything major that would prevent this from working. And although there are things, again, that we kind of lose because this is very constrained to a very specific use case, I feel like it's maybe a better approach to the UX of this, I guess, request. So the idea or goal here would be that the home directory will automatically get persisted into a volume from Pack's perspective, right? And then shared based on the image, the builder image that's used. So that way, at least there's no real, or at least there's a little bit of a safer confines as to not contaminating, the home directory for another builder. So at least kind of having some separation there. And then adding a mechanism. So like, let's go through the first scenario, right? Stuff just works. You run your application, it just works. You run it with a different image that just happens to be like a Java application as well. And you will get a lot of the same caching that was used there, right? So stuff just works. And that's what I really wanted to kind of propose. The second one is like the second request is to like take the stuff that you've already done locally, maybe like the M2 cache, and put that into this home directory. And so that's something that you could share to now the build process. And that's where this home volume, right? Because right now we have a volume flag that's really specific to platform. And so I would think that we would want to separate those. And this is like my first, kind of idea thrown on the wall here as to what we can do. I'm sure there's better options. Some of the concerns I have are still about, whether or not this is safe to do by default, essentially.
I like it. I mean, obviously the main detractor will be the initial cache stuff, I think. Because I think in one of Ben's comments, he had like 6 gig of something, right? And copying that into a volume's not going to be a super fast operation, and it won't always be in sync with your local cache. But I don't know. I like this approach of standardizing on the volumes that Pack sort of already does today.
I'm a little bit worried, like, are we talking about doing the entire HomeDir as a single volume? Because there are, thinking about cases like when there is no M2 in home on a build. What a normal build pack will do is create a symlink from home M2 to a cache layer. So then the things that end up in this home volume might be not helpful or actively break other builds that would use it naively. I wonder if what we want is specific things under home.
So I guess how would you know that from maybe a user's standpoint or even from Pack standpoint, right? Like how do you know what the build pack is going to do, whether it'll make it invalid or not?
I think you don't, which is why I'm worried about mounting in the whole home directory. Because if home isn't a bind mount, right, creating a symlink to a cached layer that then gets restored is the right thing to do. And it's the thing that would happen in most cases or in other platforms.
So if you could share just specific directories from home, would that assuage your concerns, Emily?
Yeah, I think it would, because then you're explicitly saying this exists rather than having the whole HomeDir. And I think we can trust Buildpacks to be do the right thing when stuff exists, or do the expedient thing.
It's basically like a merger of Ben's like anywhere proposal, but just for the home directory. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
So could you elaborate on that? Because I feel like, we're saying share certain directories. Who's the one that's specifying what directories are being shared or, persisted?
I assume it's the end user because it's like an advanced feature of like, I know I use, say, the like Paketo build packs for Java, and I know that they use like an M2 cache potentially, or maybe that's documented by the Paketo build packs, right? And then when I do pack build locally, I can use your -- home volume thing to say I want to mount my local M2 into maybe this directory, into the home directory. So instead of being able to volume mount anywhere, I can only volume mount rewrite in $home.
Yeah. And I think we would never want to do this by default. I think it should always be an opt-in.
Yeah, I'm trying to think through it because that seems to me again like the second motivation, right? like where I'm trying to share the stuff that I either have, or maybe it's not, right? Like, but it's maybe not as user friendly still, because you have to have that intimate knowledge. And so maybe the parts that I'm really questioning is, how does the end user know what things need to be shared, right? And maybe that's a part where we could simplify or make it more pronounced. Like, for instance, right, just kind of spitballing, but if the build pack were to somehow be able to tell me, hey, yes, you're able to cache this, you know, across multiple builds, then we could do that programmatically from the platform's perspective, from pack, right? Or these are options, you know, even that will help us tell the user, hey, you have these options of persisting this information. But without having to dig into the code of the build pack and getting a lot more intimate knowledge into how the build pack works from an end user, I feel like that's a little bit more difficult.
Are you proposing then like a build pack author would be able to provide information of what things you can mount in then? That pack or some platform in theory could leverage if they want to support it?
I think that'd be helpful. I want to hear if there's any counter to that idea. Like, would that be a terrible choice for build packs to have to provide?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's terrible. I don't know exactly where we would fit that in the current set of constructs. Like, would you put that in build pack toml of a thing statically you know ahead of time? Is it dependent on maybe the build of like what you're doing in your app? I guess that potentially makes it harder.
Yeah, so we already have this caching mechanism, right? When we do a build plan that says, hey, these layers are things that should be cached and you should be able to bring them back. I wonder if what we really need is some way to say, you know, these things are, you know, cached and you could share them, but you could share them across multiple builds and it's not specific to this, you know, application.
In that case, would that be like if I want to volume mount a thing, I guess that for scenario 2 at least, of like providing initial cache, like would I provide basically the thing that's in like /layers/build pack/ like M2 or something?
Yeah, this is where I feel like maybe I lose a little bit of momentum because I don't know exactly what every build pack does. It sounds like the Pacato build packs do something specific for the home directory. And so when we talk about the home directory, I'm familiar with that. But then when we talk about the build packs, layers, directories, and then how those are then associated and, you know, linked essentially to the home directory, that's where it becomes maybe a little bit more specific to the implementation of the build packs themselves.
I feel like having some way to use layers or reuse a cache between builds where the image has a different name is a problem we should solve, but I'm not sure if it's the same problem that this volume mounting is solving, because cached layers are a very particular concept to the lifecycle where they get restored to specific places in layer toml and they have metadata and they get added to the image. When you're mounting something into home, you're actually short-circuiting that whole process. Like, you're not getting a cache layer with your M2 cache in it because the build pack will see this thing and just use it. Not every build pack might do that. Some build packs might continue to make a cache layer and point whatever tool they're using at the cache layer and just ignore what you mounted in the home. But this is sort of like, it's a different concept and a less safe one, but a convenient one.
Yeah, less safe and convenient. I think that's pretty much the whole feature here, right? Like, cause yeah, I like it. I like the simplicity of this because it just sort of works. And like for most people, this will be a big improvement between builds, I would think. But it's just, yeah, I don't know whether it's gonna work out with all the symlink stuff. Worries me. Like, how that's
So
gonna flow.
which one are we talking about? Are we talking about the current RFC?
The one you've got in front here.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if Emily, are you talking about the current RFC or this one, the alternative unproposed proposal?
I was responding to your comment about cached layers. I think this feature isn't about cached layers. It is about something else. Because these aren't layers in the strict CMB sense. You're actually getting fewer layers when you do this.
Does the Paketo Buildpack that does Maven stuff not copy the M2 stuff into a cache layer?
It does. So it looks in your, what it would do by default is if there's no M2 in your home directory, it will create a symlink from home M2 to the cache layer. And then you'll end up with a cache layer that has your M2 cache in it. But before it does that, it checks whether M2 exists. And if it does exist, it won't make that cache layer.
When, in what world does the M2 exist on a clean build if you don't have volume mounting?
It doesn't right now.
So like this check exists for a feature that Ben's proposing, basically?
I think it exists to begin with just to be safe. Just defensive programming, but it would happen to work nicely if we allowed this to happen. Like this existed in the Java build pack before we even thought to propose this feature. Yeah,
it's coming over from like basically the V2 build packs as a, I guess that check.
I think Joe mentioned that the Heroku Java build pack does the same thing in one of these meetings.
No. I mean, like the caching part, yes, but the check for it already being there does not.
So would it like blow up if it was already there? What would it do? Would it delete it?
That's what we do in RubyLand. We delete it.
I'm not sure off the top of my head.
That's what Node Modules does, even locally as well. It just dumps it all. So.
Yeah, because
that seems like an argument against the host bind mount, because then all of a sudden you've deleted your entire M2 cache for no reason, right?
Yes, and that's what I'm concerned about this whole thing, being open-ended like that.
What if Buildpacks?
I think the difference though is like in Java land, like generally you're not doing like JNI stuff or whatever, right? So like if you're copying node modules, like you for sure have a native extension for like 90% of the apps or something that at least build on Heroku, and like you just can't trust that like node npm will just be like, well, this thing exists, so like I'm not going to install it, and then you boot the app and it fails. So like it's kind of like the other side of defensive programming. It's like, well, I can't trust this previous directory unless like I personally am the one who like saved the cache and restored it. Like who knows what the user put there. So like it is safer 100% of the time to just like rebuild it, right?
That's what I liked about one of the comment threads, like sort of having this be an explicit thing where you're like, yeah, cache volume, and you specify cache volume and it's empty by default. You can load it up if you really want. That could be part of some workflow. Obviously, it's, I don't know. It's just very explicit, which means you don't run into accidental demolitions of your local workstation or anything like that.
That's what I was originally lobbying hard for, but Ben and Steven convinced me to change my tune on that one.
You need to hold your ground better, Emily. I think that's the moral of that story.
Well, I can see either one working in different situations, right? Like I'm generally like, I am okay with this new proposal. I was also okay with the more explicit one. I can see the arguments for both. Is the middle ground like Buildpacks tell you what paths you can mount into that they will behave correctly for? And then we don't have to scope it to home or platform or anything. It's just the set of things that you're allowed to do.
mean, I guess like you were talking about how the sharing layers across multiple builds is maybe a separate concern. But like, I kind of wonder like this home thing, like on one side, like probably many build tools probably by default leverage dollar home for putting stuff in. So like you can get, there's like an argument to be made of like the 8% or whatever. But I think like all that functionality probably in Buildpacks today, like if you're doing it, like you said, they're going to be empty right now. And so Buildpacks that are being built probably already are having to work around the fact that this thing is either empty or I can't trust it. And so you're probably going to be leveraging a layer cache for build anyways of some sort, whether you have volume mounting or not. And if you're able to just share the layer volume, does that across builds, does that solve the, like the cache volume, does that solve the problem? Because it seems like that's the main use case, is to share a build cache layer, like not necessarily a layer, but a build cache. And most of the time build packs are going to put that in a layer.
Yeah, I think the part that we're missing though is whether or not we could then share this layer across multiple applications, or if this is specific to this application, right? I think that differentiator is necessary for different programming languages. Like M2, we don't care. You could share this across any application. But node modules, that would be specific to an application, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
M2 is different than node modules, right? Like M2 is just, isn't M2 just like the download of the cache from the Maven Central registry?
Yep.
Yeah.
There's an equivalent in Node as well. There's like a .npm something, if I recall. That, anyways, there's like a thing in npm as well where it like caches the contents, and creates IO has a thing. Ruby Gems also has a thing. Like it's a pretty common practice. The actual unpacked of node modules is, I guess, a thing that is definitely per apt. But you could also make an argument that like if you have a thing, like there's probably some, like we've definitely gotten this ask of like certain types of apps, like you're building 10 things of like basically the same set of dependencies, you just want to share it across all those apps or something.
Yeah, and we could still leave that mechanism. Sorry, go ahead.
So we don't have a way to distinguish between those two types of caches, though. We have cache true, false. Like, once you talk about this being a cached layer that we do some generic mechanism for, I think it gets really tricky. And also, according to the spec, the restorer is going to copy a cached layer into the layer stir. Like if you had a giant M2 cache that had every dependency from every app you built, I don't know if you'd want to sit around and wait for us to copy that across a file system for every build.
So I think we want that, like the platform is the one that provides that, or yeah, that information or data to the restore phase, right? So it would be up to Pack, for instance, where it gets that information from.
Which information?
The cached layers, right? So if, kind of going back to, if you had something like a flag that says, don't use cache, or don't use, I guess, what should we call this? Cross-app cache, right? Then it wouldn't provide that cache, those types of cache layers back into the build process. And so then you don't care, you've optimized at the platform layer for the stuff that the restorer will do.
I don't totally follow. Like, I think we'd have to sketch out something different here for me to totally understand. Because intuitively, if we could do something with cache layers, it'd be cool. I just think it's complicated, and I can't imagine a good way to do it without thinking harder about it.
Yeah. For the sake of not being completely silent here, I think the direction is still something that we're I guess maybe I want to gauge that, right? Like, do we think that we should lean more in this direction, which we should be looking at things that the build packs themselves could provide, even though granted it could be complex, it might not work at all, right? Or do we do what the current RFC says, we should do, which is basically open up the floodgate so that anybody could do anything and essentially shoot themselves, which honestly I'm kind of against, so I'm not sure I would like check the box right myself, but if that's what everybody else decides we should do, then obviously we'll get it done.
I guess I'm the only person on the core team, whatever, that didn't vote yes. So I think the floodgates by default, like I'm not going to block it, but it does make me a little uncomfortable for reasons that you said, Javier. It's definitely just like it's like we did not come up with a better hammer, so we're giving you the hammer that does everything. Seems to be like what the solution is.
I wonder if there's some way to make this from the pack side a bit more interactive where, let's take the M2 example. The Java build pack sees that there's no M2 and then it does whatever the right thing is, right? It populates the M2. I don't know. I don't know enough about exactly how that works. But then on the subsequent pack build, it could check, if there's no, I think can you alias the same volume multiple times? Anyway, I was thinking that there's a potential when you do a pack build on like your next app, it could almost interactively, unless no cache is specified or clear cache, then it could see that there's already a volume out there from a build pack. If the build pack could say that I potentially populate this M2 directory in like development or whatever, then maybe we can go at it that way, and on subsequent builds, and it would be part of the build plan, I guess, and then it would. I don't know if it's part of the build plan, but anyway, I'm just wondering if there's some communication that we could do where you'd be able to interactively be like, hey, there's already M2 cache. Would you like to default pack to like, mounting this by default for subsequent builds that require it or interact with it?
I see, something completely different essentially that is more environment aware essentially.
Yeah.
And not doing anything with the local M2, right? Like you're just saying the first build, it populates the cache as normal, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's, when you're talking about Docker volumes, there's always this sort of, escape hatch of it is a Docker volume. You could do whatever you want with it once it's created, right? Or if you knew that, or if it was like a common path of going to be pack, builder name, then you can always just kind of pre-populate it yourself if you really want to.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, is the proposal that instead of what is currently in the RFC, right, we add some logic to pack that looks for very specific, well-known locations that we know are safe to cache, right? And more or less do that ourselves instead of relying on the build packs to give us that information as a first pass.
Yeah, and we could start it out with those known locations being part of like packs config or something like that, right? And we just dump some default, like M2 would be the first, right? And then eventually if other languages do it, then you sort of have you have the configuration at the pack level to add more directories that are safe to kind of auto check for without the build packs having to know about it. And build packs can just, I don't know, it still feels a little weird on the build pack side because there's nothing that sort of tells you that you can do this. But
it feels weird to do this on the pack side too, though, because that's like super build pack specific, right? Like .m2 is very much why should pack know about .m2 at all? Like it should be language agnostic. Like, I don't know, it comes back to even like when we talked about some of the bin develop stuff, right? It's just like, it feels weird to hard code like rsyncing like no modules or those things back and forth or excluding those things. Like the platform of tools should be pretty agnostic to not have to know about that. I mean, I guess like you could make a case for like you just have a set of defaults that is in a config file that a user can edit or something, but that does feel pretty... Is there room
for this on the builder level? Like when the builder's put together with all the build packs, could you add some labels potentially to help this out so it's not pack specific, but it's builder specific? So at least the paths can come from build packs that are there when you put this thing together. I don't know.
I feel like if whether the paths are safe or not depends on the specific build packs. I wouldn't want to move the encoding of what those paths are further away from the build packs.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that seems like the right thing to do, right? And again, I feel like that would solve the primary motivation, right? I keep kind of going back to that. Like, that's really what I personally care about. And I know that that's very different than what's in the RFC right now, right? And I guess maybe I just want to kind of hone in and go back and say, like, is there backing to essentially step back, right? And go a different direction?
I mean, I think there definitely is. That's kind of the point of the final comment period, for one. And like, the final comment period is not like, please be silent, don't say anything. It's like, if you have a problem, please raise a concern before it closes, right? I guess it's not even
in FCP, right? Because I think
FCP, but even if it was, like, I think that's true, right? Like,
yeah,
there is a better idea and it changes how we think about it, then we should definitely not like necessarily filibuster, but like explore in earnest if it's like a valid concern or alternate direction, in my opinion.
It's potentially moving towards a build pack solution mean that one Java build pack would not be compatible with another Java build pack potentially. I mean, it's probably okay if it's not originally, but I don't know. It's kind of goes back to provide requires with the sort of loose naming, like, how do you make this either safe for all Java build packs to sort of do, or maybe you just don't.
Well, it's probably somewhat self-contained though, right? In that sense of, like, if, for instance, say you write a Java build pack that does not leverage any of this stuff, right? You kind of don't care if another Java build pack happens to have an M2 thing that's shared. And you both could get pulled in to be part of, say, like a Spring Boot build pack later down the line or something, right? Like, at the end of the day, as long as like dependencies get installed and unpacked in the way that that other build pack wants, like, it kind of doesn't matter how the cache gets restored or generated as long as your build pack functions and outputs the right things, right?
Yeah, I think there's still some room there for like one build pack doing something weird to the M2. Like, I know it's like they know it's persistent and start abusing it in some weird way, and then like and now that like messes up another build pack that was just using it for pure M2 stuff.
I think there's a spectrum of like safe on one end and allows you to do many things that could be useful, and maybe we can't predict what they all are up front on the other. And could we take the existing proposal and just dial it a little bit more in the safe direction? Like, what if we just didn't support bind mounts and had to be volume mounts, but we helped people copy their local things into volumes to make it easy, stuff like that. Then we get away from the OS problems, and it's not as convenient, but it's a bit safer because you're not going to accidentally destroy your host machine. And then I would say that that's a thing we should do for directories or normal files. I do think we should allow bind mounting of sockets, though.
Agreed.
Is that just a separate proposal though? That feels separate if you go down the volume mount direction.
Yeah, that's one of the things I put in my comment, was that I feel like sockets just kind of interweave themselves into this conversation versus we really thought about sockets specifically.
It could be a separate proposal if you want it to be, but I think we should support bind mounting of sockets even if we don't support bind mounting anything else.
Yeah, I think sockets came in mostly because if we were going to do bind mounting for this other use case, it made sense to also talk about bind mounting for sockets in kind of one go.
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed. And I think that's where maybe I was going with the, do we really want to deviate completely into something that's maybe more build pack specific, or just, tighten some of the concerns in the current RFC. My initial proposal was just limiting it to the home directory, right? Where you have the platform directory and the home directory, both of which are more or less safe, right, in some regard, given that this is somewhat unsafe, which is kind of weird. But, that at least would make it, it would make me feel a little bit more comfortable than saying you could just mount anything anywhere, right?
I know the idea Emily had was the thing that was brought up before too, right? Like when the proposal was originally came around for discussion. Do you know why that was shot down, Emily?
I don't think it was shot down. I feel like that's always been a valid option, right? People can copy into a volume. I think it was originally proposed as a workflow people might want to use instead of using bind mounting. I don't know if we talked about completely locking it down to only supporting that workflow.
Is the concern for copying to volume that it's expensive? Like,
just a little bit awkward.
Like that 6 gig or whatever. There was I thought there was an example or something like there was like a many gig like cache, right? And that paying that cost is like still pretty expensive.
Yeah, it's painful, right? It's not as fast and it's not as easy, but it is safer.
Stay up to date.
Yeah, it doesn't stay up to date.
Like if you keep going between Docker and not Docker, then this will never be comfortable.
I do wonder if that's more or less a concern for the bin develop workflow than it is for this workflow, right? Like a build workflow, even a local machine maybe shouldn't care about your local cache or your local files. And it's the bin developed where you really want that fast iteration, and that's where a lot of that tweaking could come in.
Yeah, I think so too. I think bin develop, if it had been here, we probably wouldn't be talking about anything except for sockets during build. Because I think if you had like a develop cache, like a develop M2 cache, then like seeding it, I don't know, it seems like you wouldn't want to reseed it often from like your non-pack related builds. It kind of feels like if it was like a pack develop machine worth of home directory, kind of like the proposal here, then it would mostly work. And then as soon as you do pack build, it would not use those directories to produce your clean, images.
I guess I would need to see a concrete proposal for bin develop in order to agree with all of that. Like, I don't know what bin develop does, and until I know what it does, I can imagine it solves any problem that is tangentially related to development, right?
Yes, that's true. Like, that's the scope of it, right? Like the purpose of develop is to focus on the development workflow. Whatever that is, right? I feel like that's the scope. And
I feel like the original proposal was that it starts a development server instead of producing an image. But
we can make
honestly,
it whatever.
like, I'm not doing that all the time. I'm building images more often than I want to start a development server. And I still want that to be fast. Like, it's not, I hate waiting for Maven to download for 10 minutes,
I think the important point, though, from maybe that discussion around bin develop is mostly, I think the problem statement probably would change in the sense that, like, there was the topic that was just brought up of, like, do you care if, like, you're using the local M2 cache versus I just want a pre-seeded cache, and then if that deviates from what I'm doing locally, that probably doesn't matter. Right? Like, I just care to make the build fast and not necessarily that I keep that thing in sync or something.
I guess the reason the syncing matters to me is because I've almost always already downloaded the dependencies onto my host machine, right? So I either have to pay to copy them onto a volume, or I have to pay the cost of downloading them again in pack. And right now, if I build the same image multiple times, like, I do get my M2 cache back. It's a cache layer. It's not like we download it literally every time. It's just that it's done using the cache layer mechanisms. So the cache is populated with things specific to that image.
So if there's a world where you could pre-seed the volume, pay like a one-time cost, but then you could share that cash across multiple app builds, does that solve your problem in the happy future world where you solve that problem?
It does to a certain extent, yeah.
I mean, it still probably sucks that like you're saying, like you have to pre-seed it, but hopefully it's like a one-time cost across many apps versus a one-time cost per app, which I can see that being very annoying, especially if you're doing a lot of demo apps or something, right? And you're just building a lot of apps.
Or I'd clean my Docker volumes and I forgot to label it, then I have to do it again. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's just like the distinction between actually caring about keeping like the M2, or I guess in that concrete example, like the cache in sync between local and in like pack world versus or the platform world versus like you really just want to provide initial cache to make that fast, right? Like I think the syncing doesn't actually matter. You just care about the performance. Is that true, Emily, for you?
Well, I don't know. If I then go to build a different app, I have to sync it again, right? If I've already, I'm always compiling the app locally first before I compile it in pack. So every time there's a new set of dependencies I need to download, I have this problem again. Like I have to download it twice instead of once. But it's definitely an improvement. Like if we're talking about my particular use case, the bind mounting M2 is clearly the fastest, best thing. But my particular use case is not everything, and I understand the arguments for why enabling that has drawbacks, right?
Yeah, I guess like more than just like the concrete implementation, I mostly just want to drive back to like the problems we're trying to solve. I think that's like one of the things Javier was trying to kind of get back to, right? Like whether it's like bind volume mount or copy volumes, like the problem that we want to solve is mostly it's like for performance, right?
Yes, if we're talking about the performance problem, there's also a socket problem. But that one can be mostly solved with the existing platform mount, so it doesn't feel as pressing.
So syncing is not a problem we're trying to solve. That just happens to get us performance the fastest way. I think it's mostly the point I was trying to make.
I wonder if Pack could pull that cache from like known Docker images. Like if you stuffed all your M2 cache into like a layer, like Pack create cache image for M2, and then Pack could start looking for that like as an additional additional cache image to look for potentially that layer, and kind of, I don't know, I guess it would have to untarball put it in the image for the build, so I'm not sure that speeds things up.
Daemon images are also like really slow to put things in and get things out of. Like when you're doing we don't even allow daemon images for the caching we have now. Like we started out allowing it, and performance was so abysmal that we just turned it off so that no one would do it.
I guess outside of Pack, are there other platforms that would leverage some of this stuff? As we're really only talking about local builds, but
BuildKit's probably the closest analog to what we have now, I think, or that what we're talking about. Where like now they have like a way to, reuse some things from build to build.
I feel like most other platforms wouldn't want to do this.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, like, even for like, it makes me think like the kind of sharing cache between apps is actually pretty important. Like even I imagine like KPack would leverage something like that for M2 cache, right? Maybe for an organization. May not be safe across multiple organizations, but within your own organization, like not having to pay that cost.
Yeah, I'm looking at Matt to see if he responds to that. You're muted.
I was double muted. Yeah, to be honest, I'm kind of half paying attention, but it's not something at least I've put a lot of thought into. I guess theoretically it could be possible to share across an org. It certainly seems like it'd start with the pack build case.
Is that something KPack users actually want, though?
We're not as mature as like pack users. So in the sense, perhaps we don't have as much feedback, but so far I don't think that's something we've come across as direct feedback.
Yeah, I do wonder if it's like a fire and forget, so they don't really care too much about the performance implications or micro optimizations. But if you're running locally, you probably are a lot more aware of it.
It
Care
seems a lot
about
more-
IaaS costs that could matter though, like sharing a single M2 cache across a bunch of builds. They get far fewer copies of large dependencies like Spring Boot and stuff like that, right?
So if that's even viable, right, I feel like the right direction would be to maybe push it down into the build packs to let us know the difference between, you know, app cache and, I don't know, builder cache. Okay. Well, I mean, I could definitely work out more details based on the feedback. I'll kind of do both. I'll kind of do the proposal to just heighten some of the, you know, concerns with volume caching, and then, you know, the kind of like rehaul kind of rethinking altogether. And I'll reply to that thread.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Javier. I imagine the rehaul is a lot more work.
I'd actually even do it as an RFC, you know, altogether, so that we could have just a specific conversation around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think another useful thing that Jesse commented to is like experimental flags. Like, I almost wonder, like, is it worth having a set of things that we want to trial out that maybe we're less sure of, that we're not promising will be there forever?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if we take in the RFC the way it is right now, like we should definitely put it behind experimental and then kind of see how many people shoot themselves before we say like, oh yeah, maybe we should rethink this.
Could be nice to sort of make that a feature of pack config. Like you could turn on or off experimental mode. And if you try to use an experimental feature when you haven't explicitly turned it on, it just tells you you have to turn it on.
Global, I would hate to do it like feature flag based, because I think that adds a lot more. Yeah, we already have the global concept, so yeah. Yeah, and I mean, from an implementation standpoint, right, it's super easy for us to do. So maybe this RFC is good enough to get in right now, put it behind experimental, see what happens, and then still keep thinking through a more, you know, specific implementation that can be used outside of just Pack, right? Thinking about KPack and other platforms as well that could leverage this.
Yeah, I mean, I even imagine on Heroku, like, people definitely ask the ability to not pay the cost of downloading stuff again. So
yeah, this would be a big leg up for even like Salesforce functions, right? Like we're talking tiny little functions, and like constantly have to download, you know, hundreds of megabytes of npm every time they create a new function, even though they clearly already have all those dependencies locally.
cool. So we have 4 minutes left. I assume that's not enough time, or if for Joe's inline Buildpacks version thing, or maybe
Yeah, there's not much to talk about here. Emily and I were talking about the inline build pack RFC and the version field. And I think we agreed that in the same way that version and URI are mutually exclusive, inline and version should be mutually exclusive, at least for now. Like we can have the registry conversation later, but I think Emily brought up some concerns that I think were valid about why that might not be a good idea. But this doesn't also, like, I think even in the future, I think we would probably use the project version if we wanted to do that. But in any case, I think what we agreed on was that it should probably be inline and version are mutually exclusive in the same way as URI and version. And then I'd like to see us warn, if you have ID, version, URI, and inline in the same file, we either need to set an order of precedence and warn or generate an error. I'm a little bit worried about the error condition because I don't want people to get into configuration hell where like they copy paste an ID version and then they add an inline and then it breaks and then they remove all three and it breaks again. And you know what I mean? Like nobody's gonna know like inherently like or like a priori what the right combination of these fields is. So I want to think through that a bit. I'll probably update the RFC.
The project version thing is actually pretty interesting as an idea as well.
Yeah, I think it makes more sense because like when we were talking about it, you really want to tie it to the code base as a whole, I think. So it does make sense to use something like that instead. But I think there's other questions to answer about if it were to go into a registry. Like what if you have multiple inline build packs and yada, yada, yada. So I kind of don't want to tackle that yet. I just want to leave the door open to it.
Yeah, and just a little bit of insight. I think we've shifted directions on a lot of the pack implementation to be a little bit more strict about the TOML file configurations. So where we would error if there's like a field, an unknown field or something like that. And I think that overall it was with the intention of helping the user out as well, so that there isn't a field that they, for the example, if they misspelled something, right? And then just it's warning instead of blowing up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
The last thing I was wondering about inline build packs just before this meeting is, do we need to have an API key for build pack API? Probably, right?
If it's just in line, I'm wondering what does it get?
It gets positional arguments that might change to environment variables someday. The format it writes things in the layers directory can be interpreted differently.
What would be the default? Are you thinking it like, I'd hate for it to be required?
1.0.
I think right now the default is 01 if you don't set it, because
that kind of
when we introduced it, we had to do that, right?
Yeah, right. No, I mean like as a build pack TOML, that's fine. It's just for the inline, it's like defaulting to 01 sucks.
I agree with that. I agree that
maybe it's like, could we look at the other build packs and use like the min version or something like that as the default? Like if you only use 03, it's just 03. And if you use 03 and 02, it's, or whatever, it goes to 02.
We could change the default when 1.0 comes around, right? To be 1.0.
Yeah. We could also just have a lifecycle have a concept of defaults now that it has multiple values for these things, right? And we could, in a lifecycle release, decide whether we're changing a default or not. But yeah, your build pack might run differently with different life cycles as the defaults change.
Yeah, but I think you definitely need an explicit option for that. And then we'll have to, I think there's no way to avoid a little bit of config hell. Like there's going to be an API, but that's definitely mutually exclusive with like URI and version.
Yeah, I'm probably like, I don't like including it, like you're saying, Joe, but I think it's pretty common in like Circle or Travis to like be like, yep, I'm on this version. And
yeah,
I think that's
Maybe just
kinda what comes down
require
to.
it because it might cause less problems than having the defaults change.
potentially. You think require it and then potentially make it optional after 1.0 and default it to 1.0?
I don't know about the 1.0 yet.
Yeah.
Require for now.
It'd just be nice. Yeah, it'd just be nice to think that like that would be temporary. Yeah,
I don't
I'll
love
look
it
at
either.
it.
I don't think like, that'd be so beautiful there, but I
Yeah, I
think we
want to
need
like.
it.
I really would before I'd settle on anything. I'd want to put it into an example, see what it looks like. Sometimes you do that, and it's like, it's not too bad because like it seems like it's going to be so long, but I think most people won't specify shell and will just use the default. So and then you don't have version anymore, so it's just ID API inline. It's not too bad.
Really terrible idea, but I'm thinking of like, Markdown where you could specify the language at the top. Like you could specify the version at the top, but I think it's a terrible idea. Just that I throw it out.
I mean, I definitely can't imagine why you'd want different API version for multiple inline build packs in the same project, Toml. Oh, you mean in the inline script? Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, again,
Oh,
terrible.
yeah, that is terrible.
Can you even cut ID if you only have one inline build pack and it just gets auto-generated for you based on your project?
Yeah, I thought about that, but I kind of settled on it being a bad idea. I just feel like, what do you put there? I mean, I guess you put inline, but Emily was talking about putting inline for the version. I think there's a little. I think it is worth having
project
that.
name, right?
Oh, okay. Maybe.
I mean, I'm just riffing on your project version idea.
Yeah. I'll think about that too.
Because you're trying to
it
cut,
would be
like API version. I feel like the API version is probably more important than the ID.
Right.
I
think I was fine with ID because there really wasn't much else that we were putting in there. But yeah, if we're starting to add some other things that really are essential, it'd be nice to. You already have a project ID.
Yeah. I also think that I'm more convinced on the inline table now too, of just like you just have a buildpacks.inline and the only thing in there is like the script for probably most people. And so you don't have to, like, basically all the other stuff is optional.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look at that. I just, again, want to see it. Is that in the comment?
I was confused by that comment.
He changed it. He had the wrong thing in there at first.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah,
Again.
It's basically just like making inline an actual table versus just like instead of like adding more keys into build packs, it's like make it a table that has the inline specific stuff in its own table in build packs.
Yeah, and then inside that inline, you would have script, shell, and version or API, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like whatever we want to add to kind of keep it separate from the normal build pack schema.
Yeah, I definitely like that instead of like the exclusivity of different values. I think it's a lot easier to comprehend as well.
Maybe I'm still like worse at Toml than I should be after this long working on this project.
I hate Toml. I'm still.
To me, this looks like it's like an array of inlines inside a build pack.
Yeah, I might be doing it wrong, but you know what I'm trying to get at, right? It's like a build pack inline property, yes, or object.
Still confused. Like, would this work ordered? Like, if you had like 3 build packs and inline, 3 more build packs and another inline, would they all roll up as you would expect?
Yes, I believe so. Anyways, we are 6 minutes over, so.
Yep. Alrighty. Yeah, I feel like I have enough to work on this. So. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.